The newest Bigfoot footage from May 2026 may be the clearest evidence ever captured. Every frame is sharp enough to study. Every movement looks impossible to fake. And by the end, you will realize that this is unbelievable proof. I'm Trevor, and tonight I'm showing you the footage that investigators still can't fully explain. You need to know the bones of this because 3 ski patrollers went up a closed ridgeline for a routine avalanche assessment 72 hours after a historic storm. 90-minute loop, standard protocol. What came back was body cam footage that should not exist. The footage doesn't begin with headlamps clicking on or a truck door slamming. That would be too clean, too prepared. Instead, the body cam lurches into motion already mid-stride, and I have to tell you, watching this for the first time, I actually leaned back from my monitor, because Patrol 1 is already running. Not a jog, nor a cautious walk through fresh powder. He is pushing through waist-deep snow like something is breathing down his neck before the timestamp even hits 0. Then comes the moment that stopped my heart. At exactly 12 seconds in, a figure shifts behind a cluster of wind-carved ice pillars about 65 feet upslope and 40 feet to the left. I had to scrub this frame by frame. It's not obvious. It's barely there. A large upright shape, partially obscured by the sideways snow, steps between 2 rock outcroppings. Not a skier. There's no lift within miles. Not a rescue worker, no reflective striping. And definitely not wildlife at normal scale. Because whatever this is stands so tall that the ice pillars only reach its midsection. The camera operator doesn't even notice the shape. He just keeps trudging forward, oblivious to what's sharing his mountain. At 18 seconds, Patrol 1 keys his radio and says something that should have been the warning. Tracks are fresh, they're not melting in. This storm's burying everything except these. The camera tilts down, and there they are. Massive footprints sunk deep into the snowpack. Each one spaced nearly 5 feet apart, far beyond any human stride. Some are partially filled with drifting powder, which means the creature has been pacing, moving back and forth, waiting. Behind him, still visible in frame for less than a heartbeat, it moves again. But this time it isn't standing high on the ridge anymore. It's lower now, closer, much closer to the camera team than anyone watching initially realized. The distance it covered between frames doesn't even seem physically possible, and nobody filming appears to notice it happening in real time. And just when you think that's the most horrifying thing hidden in this footage, wait until you see what the second camera captured completely by accident. Because while the crew thought they were documenting tracks somewhere out in front of them, something else was already watching them back from the tree line only yards away. Patrol 2's helmet cam is where the dread starts compounding. Because Patrol 1 is still blind to the creature tracking them, but a second set of eyes is now scanning the same hellscape from a different angle. And that second set of eyes sees everything. It just doesn't understand what it's seeing yet. The wind here is even more violent. Audio clipping spikes every few seconds, turning radio chatter into shredded fragments. I'd describe the storm as visually aggressive. Snow doesn't fall so much as it attacks horizontally, moving like a wall of needles instead of precipitation. Patrol 2 is facing uphill, his breath fogging the lower edge of the lens. He keeps tilting his head, squinting, trying to make sense of the ridgeline maybe 120 feet above their position. At 1 minute and 10 seconds, I've time-stamped this obsessively, the camera briefly stabilizes. Maybe he braces against a rock. Maybe he just stopped breathing. Either way, the image goes still for just over a full second. And that's when you see it. The creature is standing on that ridge, motionless and completely vertical. It is partially snow-covered, crusted white on its shoulders and head, blending so perfectly into the storm that only its outline separates it from the environment. But that outline is wrong. It's too tall by at least 3 feet, too wide through the chest, and it's not hunkered down against the wind like a human would be. It's facing directly downhill, directly at them. Patrol 2 keys. His radio and his voice has that particular crack, not from cold, but from confusion bleeding into fear. Do you guys see that ridge? There's something up there. No response. The storm is eating their transmissions. Patrol 1 has drifted out of frame somewhere downslope. Patrol 3 is even farther back, barely visible as a dark smudge against the whiteout. At 1 minute and 17 seconds, the creature on the ridge takes a single step forward. But here's what haunts me. It doesn't step downhill. It steps sideways. It's actually tracking them, parallel to their route. like it's matching their heading without ever committing to an intercept. That's not animal behavior. The team still doesn't recognize the danger of this creature. Patrol 2 lowers his camera, turns to check his equipment, and the ridge goes momentarily unwatched. When he looks back up, only 3 seconds later, the creature is gone. Not faded into the storm, not obscured by a gust, just vanished as if it never existed. But I've seen the full footage. I know where it went. And in the next few moments, the storm gives the monster cover to do something that no eyewitness has ever captured on body cam before, something that made me double-check that I wasn't watching special effects. The storm thickens without warning. Visibility drops to near zero for several seconds at a time. The body cam feeds flicker between white voids and brief, agonizing glimpses of the slope. Here's what I caught on my 17th pass through this section. During one of those whiteout pulses, maybe 4 seconds of absolute blindness, something changes. When the snow thins just enough to see again, the creature is now between camera angles, positioned squarely inside their route, approximately 120 feet behind Patrol 3. Patrol 3 has no idea. His camera shows him trudging forward, head down, occasionally checking a handheld GPS unit. The wind snatches away most of his radio chatter, but I manage to isolate one fragment. We should turn back. This is getting worse than forecast. He doesn't mention the creature. He doesn't even look over his shoulder. The Sasquatch tracking them remains completely invisible to his awareness, even as the distance shrinks. At 2 minutes and 40 seconds, Patrol 3 stops. Not because he heard something, not because he sensed danger. He stops because he looks down at the snow directly in front of him, and his camera tilts downward out of habit. The footprints beneath his boots are now fresher than the ones he was following before. That doesn't make sense. He hasn't passed anyone. No one has doubled back. But the tracks are there, deep, wide, overlapping his own trail like something has been walking in his exact footsteps from behind. That's when the storm gusts hard enough to shake the camera sideways. I mean, violent full-body sway. The audio spikes with tearing wind, and for a split second, the lens points uphill rather than down. When it stabilizes, when Patrol 3 regains his footing and straightens up, the creature has closed another gap. You could see that it's now roughly 80 feet behind him. That's not a distant observer anymore. That's a predator that has decided proximity is no longer a risk worth avoiding. It stands motionless, half-crouched against the wind, but still dwarfing every rock outcropping around it. The outline is undeniable. Broad shoulders and long arms. A head that sits too high on its neck, angled slightly forward as if sniffing the air. Patrol 3 finally turns. His camera sweeps across the slope and misses the creature by maybe 15 degrees. He's looking too far left, too low. His brain isn't calibrated to recognize something that tall standing, that close in a blizzard. He turns back downhill and keeps moving. It's crazy to think that they still have no idea. But the damage is done. The proximity shift has already happened. The creature is no longer observing from a distance. It has entered their perimeter, and the patrol has less than 90 seconds before everything falls apart. Now what happens next will make you question every blurry photo you've ever dismissed. This is the section where everything shifts from uneasy speculation to full-blown horror. Because up until now, the patrol has been operating on instinct, moving downhill, checking tracks, occasionally glancing uphill without truly seeing. But at 3 minutes and 55 seconds, that changes. And the way it changes has haunted me for weeks. Patrol 1 suddenly appears in Patrol 2's frame, converging with Patrol 3 near a cluster of exposed rock. They're regrouping finally, drawing close enough to shout over the wind instead of relying on the shredded radio frequencies. Patrol 2 is facing uphill, his body cam aimed roughly toward the ridge they descended 20 minutes ago. His breathing is heavy, visible as fog, even through the distortion. Then he shouts. I had to amplify the audio and filter out the wind noise to catch this clearly. Something is moving with us. All 3 men turn uphill simultaneously, and the camera captures the creature clearly now for the first time. It is standing in partial profile, no more than 55 feet away, slightly crouched against the wind shear, but still towering above the surrounding terrain. The trees at this elevation are stunted, twisted, barely reaching 8 feet tall. Its shoulders clear them by a visible margin. I'm looking at a creature that stands somewhere between 8 and 9 feet, covered in dark, wet fur that clings to its frame like matted insulation. Snow has accumulated on its upper back and the crown of its head, but its face, what I can see of it, is bare. Skin appearing almost gray against the whiteout. It's undeniably Bigfoot, and I think the patrols knew it too. Its posture isn't random. It isn't casual. It stands with its weight slightly forward, arms hanging but hands partially open, head angled downslope at an unnatural degree. It is tracking them, watching their every micro movement. Patrol 3 freezes, and I mean full body lockup. His camera shakes only from the wind now, not from movement. Patrol 1 raises his arm, pointing directly at Bigfoot, and for one frozen second, I think he's going to say something coherent, maybe identify it, maybe name the threat. But Bigfoot has moved. Not a step, but a repositioning. Now it stands approximately 32 feet away, having closed the gap without any sound of footsteps reaching the microphones. That's what terrifies me most about this footage. You hear the wind, you hear the men breathing, shouting, scrambling. You never hear Bigfoot. Patrol 1's arm drops. His voice comes through the distortion. Back now. They don't run yet. They walk backward, eyes locked on the shape that has somehow breached their safety bubble without making a single sound. But running is coming. And once it starts, it doesn't stop. And if you think seeing Bigfoot from 30 feet is bad, what if I tell you the hunt begins? I need you to understand what breaking distance means in this context. It's not a vehicle stopping suddenly. It's the precise moment when a threat shifts from observation to action, when whatever was pacing you decides that watching is over and taking begins. And that moment happens at 4 minutes and 42 seconds, when Patrol 1 finally stops walking backward and turns to run. The storyteller in me wants to call this section the transition from anomaly to pursuit, because that's exactly what the footage shows. Up until now, Bigfoot was moving laterally, adjusting position, closing gaps during whiteouts. But it wasn't advancing directly. Now, as all 3 patrol members pivot downhill and break into a desperate, uncoordinated retreat, the body language on that massive frame changes. Patrol 2 stumbles first. His camera whips downward, catching a split-second view of his own boots skidding across ice, then jerks back up as he catches himself. When the lens levels again, Bigfoot is no longer standing in that slight crouch. It is moving, advancing directly down the slope, each step deliberate and eerily silent, minimizing snow displacement like something that has spent centuries mastering this terrain. At 5 minutes and 12 seconds, the footage shows something that made me rewind at least 20 times. Bigfoot closes distance without appearing to rush. I measured the frames from the ridge edge to the first rock outcropping, a span of roughly 22 feet covered in under 2 seconds. But it's not a sprint. It's a long, powerful stride that eats terrain in chunks. Snow bursts outward from each footfall, but the microphone barely registers it beneath the wind. Distance collapses from 32 feet to 20, then to 15 within seconds. Patrol 1 screams into his radio. I've isolated the audio, scrubbed out the static, and his exact words are shredded, but the terror is unmistakable. "We've got a large animal, unknown, moving fast." The transmission cuts out mid-sentence, not from interference, but from the microphone maxing out as he sucks in a breath to scream again. Patrol 3 glances back. His camera catches Bigfoot at roughly 12 feet now. That's close enough to see individual snowflakes melting against the dark fur of its chest, close enough to see the way its head tilts slightly as it moves, almost curious, like a hunter watching prey trip over its own feet. Then Patrol 3 makes the mistake that ends everything. He tries to turn fully, to change direction, to cut sideways across a rock face. And Bigfoot reacts instantly, not with a roar or a charge, but with a subtle increase in pace, a lengthening of stride that eats the remaining distance like it was never there. The hunt isn't beginning anymore. It's already over. These men just don't know it yet. The timestamp hits 6 minutes and 3 seconds, and I have to be honest with you. I've watched this section over 100 times, and I still flinch. Not because it's gory. There's no blood in this footage, no screams that go on for minutes. What makes this unbearable is the speed. Everything before this has been build-up, tracking, pacing, closing distance. But the actual snatching event happens so fast that your brain refuses to process it the first time through. Patrol 3 turns to run downhill. That's the trigger. He's maybe 8 feet ahead of Patrol 2, 10 feet behind Patrol 1, and he's just decided to stop walking backward and commit to the sprint. His body cam swings forward, showing the slope below. Rocks, snow, the distant shape of Patrol 1's jacket disappearing into whiteout. Then Bigfoot enters the frame at full speed for the first time. I need you to understand what full speed looks like for something this size. It's not a human sprint. It's not even a bear charge. It's a low, explosive acceleration that launches approximately 800 pounds of muscle downhill with terrifying efficiency. Snow doesn't just crunch underfoot, it erupts, blasting sideways in plumes that momentarily obscure the legs. The stride length is absurd, easily 10 feet between footprints, covering ground in a way that shouldn't be possible on this steep, ice-laced terrain. Patrol 3 never finishes his turn. Bigfoot reaches him in under 2 seconds. I've timed it, from the moment the acceleration begins to the moment impact registers on the microphone, exactly 1.8 seconds. The camera captures only partial movement, an arm extending, impossibly long, swinging down from shoulder height. Then sudden, violent displacement of Patrol 3's entire body, lifted sideways like he weighs nothing. Just like that, Patrol 3 is gone. His body cam, still recording, still transmitting, shows a chaotic blur of snow, sky, and what might be fabric. Then it slams into something solid, and the feed goes dark for half a second before recovering. No struggle is clearly visible. That's what haunts me most. You don't see Patrol 3 fighting back. You don't see Bigfoot's face or hands. You just see motion, rapid, violent displacement, sideways and upward, disappearing into the whiteout like a doll snatched off a shelf. Patrol 2's camera catches the aftermath. His scream cuts through the wind, high-pitched and raw. Oh my, it got him! It got him! The radio feedback explodes, frequencies colliding as Patrol 1 shouts something unintelligible from farther downslope. There's nothing left where Patrol 3 stood except a deep trench in the snow, a furrow carved by something heavy being dragged uphill at speed. 2 men remain on the mountain. Bigfoot has made its first strike, and it took less than 3 seconds from first contact to complete disappearance. If you think losing 1 man in the snow is the worst of this footage, you're not ready for the next section of the footage. From here on, it becomes almost unbearable to watch. Not because the quality degrades, though the storm certainly doesn't help, but because you can hear the exact moment when survival instinct overrides everything else. Patrol 1 and Patrol 2 are now separated from Patrol 3's last known position by roughly 40 feet of vertical slope, and they both know on some primal level that turning back is not an option. They run downhill blindly. I mean that literally. Visibility has collapsed to maybe 15 feet, sometimes less. Patrol 1 leads the descent with the body cam swinging violently across his chest as he half runs and half slides down the slope. Snow blasts across the lens while his boots constantly lose traction beneath him. Patrol 2 follows unevenly behind, repeatedly looking back into the whiteout because both men are more afraid of what's behind them than the mountain beneath their feet. At 7 minutes and 20 seconds, Bigfoot reappears on their left flank, running parallel to them through the storm. It keeps pace effortlessly while the patrolmen stumble downhill in panic. The creature moves upright with long, controlled strides that barely seem affected by the terrain or wind. The body cams finally capture clearer details now. Thick, wet fur hangs dark against its body. Steam pours from its mouth with each breath, and its proportions look increasingly wrong the longer the footage lingers on them. The arms hang too low, the chest is too broad, and each stride covers an impossible distance downhill. Then Patrol 2 notices what it's carrying. Bigfoot is dragging what remains of Patrol 3 by one leg while running. The corpse repeatedly slams against rocks and frozen ground hard enough to jerk the body unnaturally. Patrol 3's helmet is gone, most of the lower half of his face has been torn away, and one arm is missing completely above the elbow. Blood continues dripping steadily from the exposed shoulder, while strands of intestine drag intermittently through the snow behind the body. Patrol 2 nearly falls when he realizes what he's looking at. Bigfoot turns its head toward them while still running, and slightly lifts Patrol 3's corpse higher, almost presenting it to them as they flee downhill. Patrol 1 slips into a buried rock hard enough for the camera to crack against stone before scrambling upright again. Both men are losing control psychologically now. Their breathing becomes ragged and panicked, while every attempt at communication collapses halfway through. Bigfoot continues pacing them from the left side of the slope while subtly forcing them downhill into open terrain. Every time the patrolmen angle toward rock cover, the creature drifts closer and cuts them off, steering them back toward the exposed snowfield. The behavior no longer feels random. It feels deliberate, as though the creature fully understands how to herd them exactly where it wants them. Patrol 3's body continues slamming against the mountainside while the creature runs beside them. At one point, the corpse strikes a protruding rock hard enough for the remaining arm to bend backward unnaturally, partially separating the shoulder from the torso in a burst of blood across the snow. A few seconds later, one of Patrol 3's boots tears free entirely and disappears into the storm, while the exposed ankle twists loosely beneath, shredded thermal layers. At 7 minutes and 40 seconds, Bigfoot closes the distance again until it is running maybe 20 feet away from Patrol 2. The camera stabilizes just long enough to capture the clearest view of the creature anywhere in the footage. Blood coats most of its torso up to the elbows, fresh streaks running visibly through the fur from Patrol 3's remains. Its breathing stays completely controlled despite the incline and speed. Then the creature abruptly lifts Patrol 3's body higher with one arm while still running. The corpse folds violently backward over its forearm until something tears audibly through the wind. The abdomen partially splits open and dark organs spill downward against the creature's chest. Without slowing pace, Bigfoot lowers its head and bites directly into the exposed side of Patrol 3's neck hard enough to jerk the body sideways while blood immediately pours across its chest and forearm. Patrol 2 begins openly sobbing while running. He repeatedly calls Patrol 3's name into the radio, despite the fact that the remains are fully visible less than 30 feet away. His words barely register through the wind because he has started hyperventilating so badly that most sentences collapse into ragged gasping. The creature disappears back into the whiteout almost immediately afterward. One moment it is visible pacing them through the storm, and the next it simply vanishes beyond the snow without any clear indication of direction. The disappearance itself seems to affect the surviving patrolman more severely than direct visual contact. Once they lose sight of it, both men begin looking in every direction simultaneously while continuing downhill, terrified that it has repositioned somewhere ahead of them. Only 90 seconds have passed since Patrol 3 was taken. At 8 minutes and 30 seconds, the two surviving patrolmen reach a rocky outcrop protruding from the slope. The formation provides partial shelter from the wind and enough cover for them to collapse behind the largest boulder while desperately trying to regain control of their breathing. Patrol 1 nearly vomits into his face, covering while fumbling repeatedly with the GPS unit attached to his jacket. Patrol 2 keeps sweeping his camera toward the whiteout behind them, expecting movement with every gust of snow. The atmosphere during these moments becomes almost worse than the chase itself because both men understand instinctively that the creature has not abandoned pursuit. Patrol 1 eventually says the thought out loud while scanning the storm beyond the rocks. Where is it? The question hangs there beneath the sound of the wind because neither man believes they escaped anything. They are simply waiting for it to reveal itself again. Patrol 2 notices the blood first. Fresh streaks of dark red are smeared across the snow behind the rocks where they stopped. The camera follows the trail upward toward the ledge above them, and the footage captures Patrol 3's severed arm resting carefully on the boulder directly overhead. The glove remains attached to the hand. Snow accumulates slowly across the exposed flesh while the fingers move slightly in the wind. Patrol 2 recoils backward hard enough to strike the rock behind him with an audible grunt. At the same moment, both cameras tilt upward toward the ridge above the outcrop. Bigfoot stands there, motionless against the storm. The creature stands motionless on a secondary ledge roughly 25 feet above them, partially silhouetted through the snowfall. Strips of flesh from Patrol 3's body hang across its shoulders, while the corpse itself has been opened further, ribs exposed beneath shredded clothing and organs hanging down its torso in dark strands. Patrol 1 immediately drags Patrol 2 sideways from behind the rocks as Bigfoot begins descending toward them. It moves downhill with terrifying control, stepping from ledge to ledge without hesitation while heavy impacts echo through the storm. The patrolmen break into another downhill sprint the moment the creature reaches the outcrop. Patrol 1 nearly loses balance while pulling Patrol 2 through knee-deep snow as the sound of heavy footfalls behind them signals that the creature has finally accelerated into full pursuit. Then Bigfoot throws what remains of Patrol 3 downhill toward them. The corpse crashes directly into Patrol 2 from behind, hard enough to knock him completely off his feet. Both bodies tumble together through the snow, while exposed organs spill across his jacket and arms. Patrol 2 begins screaming uncontrollably as he tries to shove the remains away from himself, but he becomes tangled in the corpse during the fall and cannot regain his footing quickly enough. Patrol 1 continues downhill several strides before realizing his partner is no longer beside him. When he turns back, the footage captures Bigfoot reaching Patrol 2 before he can stand. The creature lands on top of him with enough force to drive both bodies deep into the snowpack. One hand clamps completely over Patrol 2's face, while the other grabs his left leg near the knee. Then it pulls in opposite directions. The body separates at the hip almost instantly. The sound resembles wet fabric, tearing mixed with cracking wood. Blood floods outward across the snow, while Patrol 2 screams with such intensity that the microphone distorts. The lower half of his body remains trapped beneath Patrol 3's remains, while Bigfoot lifts the upper torso by the skull. One thumb visibly sinks into an eye socket as the creature raises him higher. Then it slams his head against a boulder. The first impact cracks the helmet. The second caves part of it inward. By the third strike, blood and fragments of bone spray visibly across the surrounding snow. Patrol 1 turns and runs harder than before, no longer attempting controlled movement. The footage becomes almost impossible to follow because he is effectively throwing himself downhill in blind desperation, bouncing off rocks and repeatedly losing footing while the storm swallows everything behind him. For several seconds, the only sounds are his ragged breathing and the heavy impacts of footsteps somewhere beyond visibility. Then, even the footsteps disappear. That silence causes him to slow instinctively. Bigfoot emerges directly ahead of him through the whiteout. The creature had circled downhill again without being seen. Patrol 1 screams and attempts to change direction, but Bigfoot reaches him before he can turn fully. The impact sends the camera spinning sideways into the snow while the audio erupts into static and shouting. The footage stabilizes briefly with the lens partially buried sideways against the ground, giving a clear view of Patrol 1 attempting to crawl away through the snow while gasping for breath. Bigfoot grabs the back of his backpack and drags him backward effortlessly across the ice. Patrol 1 claws desperately at the ground while screaming for help that no longer exists. Then the creature plants one enormous foot directly onto the middle of his back. The spine breaks audibly beneath the pressure. Patrol 1's body folds unnaturally against the slope while his scream abruptly collapses into choking sounds. Bigfoot kneels over him while steam pours from its mouth into the freezing air. The camera remains tilted sideways only a few feet away as the creature hooks both hands beneath Patrol 1's jaw and begins pulling upward steadily. The skin stretches first, then muscle tears. Finally, the lower jaw separates completely from the skull in a burst of blood that splashes directly across the camera lens. Patrol 1 continues convulsing weakly against the snow for several seconds afterward, while thick, gurgling sounds spill from the ruined cavity where his mouth used to be. Bigfoot holds the detached jawbone briefly in one hand before dropping it beside the body. Then the creature notices the camera. It slowly leans forward until its face fills almost the entire frame. The details are horrifyingly clear now, thick ridges above deep-set eyes, wet blood hanging from strands of fur around the mouth, steam rolling steadily from flared nostrils. The expression itself is not enraged or animalistic in any recognizable way. The creature simply looks focused, fully aware that it is being observed. After several seconds, one massive hand reaches toward the lens. The image tears sideways into static. The audio continues briefly afterward. Heavy dragging sounds move across the snow alongside repeated wet impacts and intermittent cracking noises that resemble bones snapping one after another. Then the recording cuts to silence completely. That's where the footage ends. That's where every question begins. You've seen what I've seen. Now ask yourself, if this evidence isn't real, why did the people who reviewed it refuse to go back into the field ever again?